Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. Mr. Holtz-Eakin, you talked about some of the factors having to do with the growth rate, and I'm on board with a lot of those. You didn't mention immigration, which is another one I would add. And the other thing I had a question for you, though, is what's the effect of federal debt on the growth rate?
So first of all, I did mention immigration in my written testimony. I think it's a very important issue, and the U.S. has never really used immigration as a tool of economic policy, and could, I think, reform its core visa granting programs to take better advantage of that. And I'd be happy to discuss that further if you want. In terms of the debt, the outlook for the debt really has, I think, significant impacts on the capacity for the economy to grow. And the mechanisms are the following. One, every time the federal government borrows a dollar, it takes a dollar that would otherwise be available for investments in skills, innovation, capital. That's an important channel by which the debt affects the economy. It's not too visible at any point in time, but it's sort of a slow, corrosive opportunity lost. And we're doing an enormous amount of that right now. The second thing is, at some point, it's not today, if you're a businessman looking at investing someplace in the globe and you look at the United States and it has a fundamental mismatch in its federal budget, you have to start asking yourself, well, how does this get resolved? Does it get resolved by a crisis? Certainly we hope not, but that's not a pro-growth strategy. We could just tax and close that gap. That's not a pro-growth strategy. Or we could get the core spending programs under control and have a revenue stream that matches them. But only one of those three is good news.
Right. Well, let me ask you about that.
That's a bad news thing.
But is it appropriate to cut taxes on high income earners who are particularly wealthy individuals at a time when the economy's strong? Doesn't that really that adds to the retardation of the growth rate, doesn't it?
I think that you ought to think about tax policy not in terms of just high income individuals, but what will be the incentives for saving, investment, and growth over the long term.
Right.
And tax policy should be designed to heighten those to the extent possible.
Also, it has to be designed to cover your expenses at some level.
Yes, and we're not close at the moment.
And Mr. Elmendorf, I'd ask you, I keep hearing that debt is a long-term issue. But it does seem to me that, we hear that we're going to be spending more on interest payments than children in 3 years and more on interest payments than defense in 5 years. Isn't this something that's with us right now?
Well, as you know, Congressman, federal debt is now at a historically high level relative to GDP. Right. As I noted, that's a problem that you or your successors will ultimately confront. I think the question is when and how. And so when you talk about when to confront that, it is good to do when the economy is strong,
like it
bad to do if the economy is on the edge of recession or in a recession or in the first part of a recovery. And then you come to the question of how, and you have to decide on behalf of citizens like me what we want the society to be about. And so when you think about tax policy, it is about raising revenue. It is about the incentive effects, as Doug said. It is also about who's bearing the burden. And given the great divergence of incomes in this country over the last several decades, and in particular the slow growth of incomes for people in the bottom half of the income distribution, I think it's appropriate to have the burden borne more by people who are higher up in the income distribution. And I would also just emphasize that the when federal dollars reduce private investment in innovation and so on, that can be a cost, but also if budget stringency reduces federal investments in R&D and in education and so on, that also has a cost for the future growth of the economy.
No, 100%. I don't mind the idea of investing. I think we should be investing in that sort of thing. I don't like the idea of accruing interest payments, which are becoming a bigger part of the pie. And in the face of this, in the course of this economy, which is very strong, the majority in the last Congress cut taxes in a way that seemed to me that was unresponsive to the need to fill the gap in the debt, and also ignored the effect, the slowing of growth that happens from this debt over time. And I think we're going to have to recover from that in what you call the next tax policy. But really, just quickly, Mr. Elmendorf, broadly speaking, with respect to housing, in the last recession, we responded to the crisis by providing 7 to 9 million homeowners consumers relief, enabling them to restructure their mortgage. But the worth for the typical household plunged by about 40%, and economic inequality is exacerbated. Can you, in a few seconds, tell me how you think our response for homeowners did, and whether we could do better next time?
A lot of smart people worked really hard to develop policies to help homeowners in the last downturn. I don't think we were terribly successful in the end, but I think that importantly reflects the difficulty of that challenge. Too many people bought houses they couldn't really afford on the hope that house prices would keep rising, and they didn't keep rising. It was very hard to solve that problem, so I wish more had been done, but I don't think it was so straightforward. I think it is important going forward that we have the right sorts of regulation that help people avoid avoidable risks like that.